I don't do this very often because I don't know how to do it really, but with the way the world is now, or how it is going to become very soon, I feel like I don't have much of a choice. So I don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to say, if you are part of any marginalized group that is being threatened of having your way of life taken away from you, I want you to know that when you are here, when you are clicked on one of my videos, if you join my community Discord server that I'll plug at the end of the video, you're safe. You will not have anything to worry about. You will not be bullied. You will not be judged for what you do or who you love. You will not be judged for how you look when you are here. Sorry, my camera died, but yeah, as I was saying, any group of people who feel unsafe, you are safe with me and everyone here in this community. I'm doing okay mentally. It's just a little scary. I have a wife. I have women in my family who I fear that their basic rights as human beings are going to get taken away, and that's kind of scary for me to think about as someone who really can't do anything about that. But we will keep fighting, and the world will keep turning. We just have to make sure that we're strong enough to wither it. So, with that said, let's get on with the video. Let's try to think about something else. Most of the time, when I make videos on these smaller games, I can sit here and say, oh yeah, I found this game on Twitter, or this showed up on my TikTok, maybe even I played this demo in a Steam Next Fest. But when it comes to Ultra Age, I, for the life of me, can't remember where I first heard of it. I did play a demo for it a while back on the Nintendo Switch of all platforms, a demo that apparently no longer exists. I can't find it on the eShop. Ultra Age was released for the PlayStation 4 and the Switch in September of 2021, with PC getting a port the following April. Developed by Next Stage, this game is described as a high-flying action game and nothing more. The Ultra Age fan wiki mentions that this is a Metroidvania though, so that might be something to look forward to. I don't really remember a lot from that demo, to circle back to that, but that might be because I played it on my bachelor party trip. I'll let that stew on you, and you can make a call on how cool I am. But yeah, I don't remember anything substantial about this demo. It was fun, but nothing stuck out to me, like, at all. So I don't think there's really anything left to do besides jumping in and getting this rolling. This is Ultra Age. In the year 3174 AD, the organization known as Orbit sent one of its agents on a routine mission
to collect a frontier relic.
So we just have to get the goods?
Our hero Age and his robotic partner Helvis have been sent to this planet to retrieve a relic from the defunct organization Frontier. This is a big deal because there's a big reward in it for him.
Don't you only have about 7 days left to live? The reward for completing this mission successfully is eternal life.
So yeah, things are at stake. Luckily, they find the relic and begin making their way back outside when Helvis is destroyed by one of Age's comrades from Orbit. This is Medea, and she wants to take the relic back to Orbit herself, so she attacks Age. Age is able to escape with the relic, realizing that Helvis somehow transferred his consciousness into it. It's also discovered that this relic can control the flow of time. It's in Age and Helvis's best interest that they get to the bottom of whatever Medea plans to do with this relic, while also trying to get back to Orbit's mothership. Helvis and Age then basically go on an entire odyssey to find an old Frontier spaceship so they can fly back to Orbit. Eventually, Medea catches up to them for a midway point plot dump. This is some of the most paint by numbers, rival who knows more than the hero does but doesn't feel like elaborating so they have to fight nonsense. And then, when it is explained what's happening, it's comically over-explained.
That relic is a time-space crystal.
Time-space crystal?
And their vain desires left behind nothing but monsters in the old civilization.
The old civilization? Nanomachines.
So this whole plot dump is here to explain that the old civilization discovered the time relic that Age found at the beginning of the game. Somehow it collapsed their civilization and left it overrun with monsters. A new group of people, cleverly called the New Civilization, sprouted up and planned to use their lifespans as tools. Somehow. If you couldn't tell by the tone in my voice, this story is confusing for all the wrong reasons. It's not deep, even though it tries to be, and its worst attribute is how meandering it is. There are so many instances of Age and Helvis heading towards an energy reading because they think it's something important, just for it to be a big monster that Age has to take down. A whole hour and a half of game time for nothing other than to stretch the game out. And this happens like 4 times. The actual substance of the story is represented by probably 40 minutes of actual cutscenes. Everything else is fluff. There is no point in sugarcoating it.
Let's just say you're telling the truth. Then what is Deucalion planning to do with the relic?
He plans to accelerate time on Earth, to create an environment where the old civilization can survive again.
After beating her, Age just walks away from Medea. He doesn't kill her or anything, he just leaves. And besides one pointless cutscene later on, that's the last time we see Medea. Age and Helvis end up making it to the Frontier facility. Shortly after, Helvis is taken over.
My name is Atlas, Frontier's greatest AI.
This Frontier AI, Atlas, guides Age through the facility. Atlas is going to use the relic to reset the Earth to a point when humans can live again, and in order to do that, it will need a lot of power. Atlas tells of how the old civilization sacrificed clones and cyborgs to accumulate their energy.
Treating life like it's something disposable. How could they?
And then we're immediately shown that Age was the original clone. Bum bum bum. Atlas then drops the bombshell that it and Deucalion used to be one and the same. This little journey was all to get back to Atlas's original body so he could keep the destruction going. I don't really know. After the AI is taken care of, the last piece of the puzzle is getting back up to orbit and handling Deucalion himself. And oh my god, we launched the spaceship! Finally! He has been looking for this thing the whole damn game. But Deucalion comes knocking and is like, yep, it's true, I'm evil. Now come here, clone, give me the relic.
You clones are always reasonable. After all, that's how you were designed.
Turns out that Deucalion isn't an individual though, he is a collective. A hive mind that is made up of presumably the same kind of clones that Age is. This is foreshadowed a few times in the beginning of the game.
You kind of look like him. But your personality is just...
Really? Deucalion must be handsome too.
Your face might resemble Deucalion, but you lack his brains and wit, so don't let it go to your head.
It's kind of interesting how Deucalion is set up as this god figure for Orbit.
It was Deucalion who achieved what Frontier wouldn't even dare to try. He went to space, founded Orbit, and saved all of humankind.
The organization talks about this guy as their savior. That's cool, I'm down for a twisted leader story. But I think this falls short by one thing. The only members of Orbit we see are Age, Deucalion, who are already basically the same person, and Medea. That's all. From what I understand, Deucalion was the reason Orbit became a splinter group and broke free from Frontier, or the old civilization, or whatever you want to call it. So in order for me to really feel the impact of what this man did for this group of people, I need to be able to put my eyes on the group of people, you know? This game was made by a very small team though, thus I get why that's not the case. I hate to say it, but I think the story was just a little too ambitious. I was following it when it was just a story about a badass adventurer and a robot searching for a way to get home. But when we start getting dropped into the new civilization and the old civilization and time travel, I could not be bothered. Oh yeah, the end of the story. More Deucalion clones are closing in on Age, so Helvis uses the relic to warp the ship into the past, to the year 2173 AD. We get a glimpse of some sort of wrecking crew salvaging what I assume is the ship's crash site. Age is shown to still be alive, and it kind of makes me think this insinuates a time loop. Does this Age go back to the past and then become Deucalion somehow? He eventually creates Orbit and mass produces clones of himself, only for one to be named Age and eventually pick up where the game began? I have no real evidence to support that besides what I've laid out. I'm just kind of spitballing here, so yeah. But yeah, the story really lost me, and I honestly, I could have done a better job explaining that story. I wish I would have, but honestly, it was just boring, and I don't feel like wasting my energy on something that I don't really think you're going to enjoy if I didn't enjoy. So now let's move on to why I really gave this game a shot in the first place, the combat system. Ultra Age is an action RPG in the basest sense. You'll defeat enemies to gain experience that you'll then haul back to checkpoints, using them to buy upgrades for your weapons and Age himself. Age's moveset isn't as complicated as you might think. You have a light attack on X and a heavy attack on Y. The light combo can accept 4 inputs before it resets. Hitting Y down the chain of light attacks will give a different result depending on where you hit. After the first hit, you'll get a launcher, slashing upwards and sending smaller enemies into the air. After the second light attack, we get this stab move. I personally don't see the point in this one. Its damage isn't super high and the animation's end lag is hefty, so you're kind of stuck there for a second if you use it. The third input gives you this wide-reaching spin move. Age moves forward a bit while swinging his sword 3 times. This is probably the best move in the game. When surrounded by groups of enemies, there is just flat out not a better move to use. And then the fourth input is good for single targets. It's this flurry move that hits more times than the spin, except it's not great for hitting surrounding enemies. The damage does make it worthwhile though. Age can jump and then double jump, then when in the air he can slam back down with Y. He's also equipped with the wire mapped to the left bumper. This is a grappling hook that can warp him to specified points in the first third of the game before it's dropped completely. After that, the wire does have its uses in combat. It can pull smaller enemies to Age to interrupt their attacks or separate them from the pack. They can also be isolated in the air, which is very helpful later on. By double tapping the input, he can warp to the target, dealing damage as well. The wire is a good tool. It helps Age's mobility and keeps fights spry. There are even some bosses' attacks that you can use it to dash through, though his best defensive tool is the dodge. If you were getting Nier Automata vibes from the game's attempt at a story, you're not crazy because the combat has similarities too. This dodge acts identically to 2B's. It can be infinitely spammed, allowing Age to just phase through attacks as long as you can time it correctly. It works well as a dodge, but that's all it does. It just negates damage, no counterattack afterwards or anything of the sort, making Age's defensive game a bit lacking aside from one other technique. Those are the basics, but this combat system's defining mechanic is blade switching. Throughout the adventure, Helvis will be turning raw materials into swords for Age. You can have 4 equipped at a time and you can cycle through all of them with the right bumper. While they all have different uses against different enemy types or environments, they all share the same moveset for the most part. The combos I went over a moment ago apply to every weapon. The default sword is the steel blade. It's the most common, but it's also the weakest. Every weapon on your selection has a switch move that's activated by holding down the right bumper and then pressing the corresponding button. For the steel blade, it launches enemies, which I like. It's kind of redundant since every weapon has access to a launcher on the first input of their combo, but it's nice to have even more immediate access, I suppose. The thing about these blades though is they're constantly breaking. Their condition is represented by their meter in the bottom corner. When this meter gets towards the bottom, that means you can execute that blade's break blade attack. For mostly all the blades, this will launch a huge attack that deals a lot of damage but also breaks that blade. You then get the katana, a fast sword that's main purpose is to attack living creatures. Namely, these crystal jaguar things or these dodo birds. Mainly because when using this blade against them, their critical meter drains, and when it's completely gone, you can press B and kill them instantly. Its switch move sees Age running while getting a few slashes in. I actually found this move really useful in staying on top of enemies. Similar to the aerial Y move, which sends Age in a diagonal arc to the ground. This move has decent knockback properties, which comes in handy, believe me. Only downside is the katana is next to worthless against robot enemies, but that's where the claymore comes in. This slow thing has a combo that only goes up to 3 inputs, but that doesn't matter because the spin move is the claymore's bread and butter. It reaches pretty far, and against swarms of robots, it's your best option. Plus, its switch move is a counter. Age will block any incoming damage and then swing back while being totally invulnerable during the process. It is pretty awkward to have the counter take me off of whatever blade I'm using, but it's not the end of the world. It just causes me to fumble a bit to get back to the blade I was using. Towards the end of the game, you can get the charge claymore. This blade has the exact same moves as the base claymore down to the jumping slam and the counter. Its only purpose is to basically be a key for this section where you have to hit enemies to fill a meter, which then allows you to break barriers. From what I can tell, filling up the meter has no effect on how much damage the blade does to the actual enemies you fight. It's just padding. Then we have the lightning blade. This blade is used to build up a shock effect on enemies. Some robots will have shields that need to be disabled by the shock status, but similar to the wire points, these shields don't appear much beyond their introduction. Its switch move sends a short wave of electricity in front of Age. It's not very effective, so yeah. The best way to build shock is with the break blade attack that causes a huge AoE burst of electricity, and after some upgrades will stay on the field and pulse for a while, hitting every enemy inside for big damage. Finally, we have the gun blade. This blade is certainly the most flashy of the selection. As you upgrade it, the combos gain extensions that see them shooting forward with more attacks. It's cool to look at, but again, I don't think it does much. The gun blade is unique that its heavy attack is actually a ranged shot. It's not very strong, but it's decent at interrupting attacks. Only downside is that the charged variant is really inaccurate. You can't pivot or turn after you've begun charging, and it also doesn't snap to any locked on targets, so those shots are all whiffing if you didn't turn age the right way beforehand. The break blade attack is just a really strong shot. It's slightly awkward looking since the enemies are constantly trying to get close to you, but it still packs a punch, so that's good. That's what the player has at their disposal, and for an indie game, I don't have many problems with it as a tool set. I would have loved a counter that isn't so slow or that swaps weapons automatically, and I would have preferred a reward for executing a perfect dodge. You do it so often that I think a Bayonetta witch time would slow down the combat to a crawl, but due to the time travel themes, I think it would have been conducive to the story as well as gameplay to see perfect dodges contribute to a resource or a meter that accumulates. Maybe when the meter is filled, Age could slow down time and be free to put the hurting on these enemies. That's just a thought though, because if you were to ask me what this combat system's biggest issue is, with my whole chest, I would say the enemies. I played this game on the hard difficulty, per usual. From what I gather, this increased enemy health, damage, and most notably, aggression. I can take the enemies hitting harder and taking a little more to kill, but what brings the experience down a peg for me is the constant attacking that gets in the way of my fun. You'll often face off against large groups of these robots. They spread out enough so that the spin move won't hit them all, meaning that stragglers outside of your range will be able to complete their attacks, which means you have to dodge them. Thankfully, the dodge is generous enough to cancel into from just about any other action. So this isn't an issue of taking unfair damage, it's an issue of maybe swinging the sword 2 times before you have to dodge, then you swing it once before you have to dodge again. Eventually, I mitigated this by pulling enemies into the air one at a time to whittle their numbers down, but that's not fun. And for enemies like these flying robots who have this spray of bullets for an attack, it's so frustrating. Attacks of all kinds are accompanied by a red flash. Thank God. But I would argue for this attack in particular, it doesn't matter. You can dodge it, but it comes out as fast as a bullet would. So even when pulling them into the air, if I exhaust my attacks and dodges at the wrong moment and fall into their attack, there's nothing I can do even when coming down with an attack of my own. And with the bigger enemies that don't get interrupted by your attacks, it's even worse. Larger robots that will pack a large punch, oh my god, the crystal tiger things, I think they're called dropels or something. I call them annoying. They're not as bad as Astral Chain's enemies, I'll give them that, but dude, come on. These fights devolve into rings around the rosy until you can find an opening to get a hit in, or enough hits to use the katana's break blade attack. That's honestly what all of the fights boil down to in this game. Spamming X, 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 Y to attack the most enemies over and over. And even for some bosses, because they're robots, and the claymore, which is the only weapon you should be using on robots, only has the spin move. Then when it's ready to break, you use the moves to take some bonus damage off, then it's back to business as usual. Bosses in this game are so boring, dude. You learn their movesets and dodge the attacks when they feel like throwing them out, and when you have your turn to attack, you hit the combo you want to until it's their turn again. Maybe you get a break blade attack in there somewhere, maybe they jump away and you miss it completely. You just get back into that routine if that's the case. There is nothing you see from the beginning of the game that isn't there at the very end of the game. The combos are so limited. I appreciate the simplicity of the inputs being universal for all the blades. Seriously, if I would have had to memorize 5 different sets of button combinations, this combat system would have been a certified button mash fest. But by standardizing the results of every combination, we've saved the player from having to memorize one more thing for every weapon. The break blade system is a great idea. I mean that too. It makes me think of a survival horror game where you'll find ammo for the stronger weapons, but you have to use them sparingly because you only have a limited amount. That's what I assumed it would be anyway, but it turns out the blades are simply keys for combat encounters. Depending on what enemy you're fighting, you have a blade that the game has taught you to pull out for that situation. If it's biological, use the katana. If it's a robot, use the claymore. If it has a shield, use the lightning blade. There's nothing wrong with this, by the way, it's perfectly competent, but this is all shot in the foot by the abundance of blades you find. You're never hurting for a blade in a situation you would need it. The game showers you with blades at every turn. After every encounter, enemies drop blades randomly. You'll find crystals that award 2 or 3 of them that recharge every time you die and respawn. And this system gets even less strict when you use the steel blade and the gun blade. 2 blades that don't have an affinity to any enemy type. They're just there to have fun with, which is cool, but if you were trying to create some type of system with tension, this kind of dissolves that tension immediately. If the goal was to make a combat system that's just a generic hack and slash game with lots of ways to hit bad guys, they succeeded. The abilities and moves you have access to function and do what they're supposed to do. But if the goal was to create an action game that requires technical skill and the ability to overcome mechanically challenging encounters, I'm not so sure. And if the goal was to create an action game where managing different weapon types to combat different enemy variations that created this interesting balance for when these blades should be used, then I would have to say they could have done a lot better. The world you travel doesn't help a whole lot either. I was hoping that when I read that word, Metroidvania, on the wiki, that I was at least going to be coming back to old locations with new abilities to unlock secrets or alternate paths. But no, this is a very linear game. The only time I think I created extra paths that looped back to old areas were, again, towards the beginning of the game. Ultra Age's beginning is, I don't want to say different from the middle and ending, but it also feels like it's trying more out. The wire whip and the extra paths are so curiously brought up and then dropped shortly after. The only time I made a new path was after finding the claymore after like an hour and a half of playtime, and I was able to break this crystal barrier. And then shortly after that, I opened up a door in one of the facilities. But again, this doesn't matter because this is a linear game. When you're done with one area, there is no way to go backwards. Once you complete an area, you leave it in that sequential order. The only exploration you do is looking for small deviations in the level that hold upgrade materials. Oh yeah, the modules. So I probably should have put this in the combat, but it never made much of a difference, so I'll just talk about it now. As you explore, you'll find these purple crystals that have names like HP, attack, defense, blah blah blah. But as you progress, you'll find higher tiers of these modules. HP 2, attack 3, defense 4, you get the idea. But the crazy thing to me is, they're randomly rolled, and you can find weaker versions of the same module and still equip it. Like, why? You walk up to the module and it will either have green numbers or red numbers. There is never a trade-off scenario where having more attack decreases defense or vice versa for any other stats, so what's the point? You walk up to a purple crystal and if you see green numbers, you grab it. If you see red numbers, you walk away. There is no decision to be made there. This whole mechanic feels incredibly half-baked to me, an inclusion to have stats simply because we're an action RPG. But it's not worth any more discussion. Back to the world design, it's incredibly rudimentary. The linear hallways can sometimes turn into small boxed-in spaces to run around and maybe find an upgrade material, but they're always, literally always, closed off by the most blatant, invisible walls you've ever seen. Listen, I get that this game had to focus where it mattered and invisible walls save time and resources, but I would have rather them just block this shit off, man. It looks so cheap to just leave these things like this. But oh well, it's not the end of the world. Towards the final hours of the game, you're given free reign to roam a large-ish open area to explore for materials. This is neat, but nothing really comes of it. Similar to the biggest display of padding this game has to offer, these labyrinths. There are around 4 occasions in this game where you'll be placed underground where boxed rooms are connected by tunnels. You will fight battles to open these doors to make a choice on which way to go in order to find the way out. These just... they suck. These add no interesting gameplay scenarios or challenges. They are literally here to give you more mindless battles with no consequences. The last labyrinth you travel with Atlas even sees you fighting 2 of the first bosses over again with absolutely no changes. They are simply here to be reused content. It sold it for me. This game was scared of its own runtime, so it had to bloat it by feeding me stuff I had just played through. So disappointing, man. Really quickly, there is a free DLC side mode that was released called Project Rebirth. This is a roguelike mode that sees Age running through a randomly generated labyrinth, picking up randomly generated modules and weapons. The thing about this mode though, they've disabled the blade's damage buffs for certain enemy types. Katanas don't deal extra damage to biological enemies. Claymores don't do extra to robots. You're now free to use whatever weapon type you want to on any enemy type in the game. I didn't spend a lot of time with this mode at all, I'll be honest. But as a core conceit, I think giving up on your main mechanic is interesting. It certainly opens the gameplay up, not having to worry about being low on a certain blade for a certain situation, but it also makes combat way less interesting. I don't think I would have cared to go through this mode if it was left untouched, but I also don't think taking the affinities away changed my mind. I don't have much to say on it, I just wanted to mention it. To comment on the game's visuals, they're passable. I'd say this game gets a pass on its lackluster visuals because of its initial target platforms. With the game originally planned for the Nintendo Switch, it couldn't put the strengths of the Unreal Engine to the test. And because of this, even on my moderately powerful PC, we have passable environments that don't really impress. There's the occasional reflective surface that does look decent, but bland environmental design is everywhere you look. The art direction is pretty subdued with a lot of sterile looking factories. Those labyrinths are the worst of it because it's all repeated. There was on occasion a nice looking environment like the train station, but everything else was just basic. The models during the dialogue exchanges were visually bland. I enjoyed the fully animated action sequences after boss fights, but it's too little too late. This review wasn't easy to write. The story, while attempting to say so much, said nothing at all. The combat is passable but stands out in no area whatsoever. I wish they would have gone further in either the technical skill of battles or the resource management of the blades. But since both are so dreadfully undercooked, I couldn't be bothered to talk more about it, even with the flashier attacks that I did enjoy using. Structurally, the game is as basic as you can get, with hallway after hallway bringing you to the next destination. And when it does try to branch out, it has nothing really to offer the player as an incentive. The systems aren't complex enough to offer the player anything for longevity's sake, and the game's looks are a product of its scope. I would have preferred something more stylized, but I won't judge a Nintendo Switch game for looking like a Nintendo Switch game. If you're deathly curious, you can find the game on Switch, PS4, and PC, but I would honestly recommend you spend your money on other games before you play Ultra Age. I congratulate the team for accomplishing what they did here. My hat is off to them, especially given the size. But I also can't look past this game's issues. Play it if you must, but there are better options out there. Thank you so much for watching. I apologize if this one was a bit negative, but I was just being candid. If you're interested, you can find this video as well as my other recent videos all uncensored and ad-free on my Patreon. Speaking of the Patreon, it is now time to shout out my one and only $10 administrator account supporter, White Ghost 117. Thank you so much, man. You know, I bled my heart out to you, but I appreciate it so much. If you too want to be part of this long, illustrious list, be sure to check out the link in the description. Sorry if I sound a little different from the original recording. I'm doing this the morning after because I realized I forgot to do it. Anyway, thank you guys so much. I'm also looking to add some exclusive content pretty soon over there, so you might not want to miss that. I would also love for you to check the description for an invite to my community Discord server. We talk about action games, indie games, RPGs of all kinds, and a lot more. And listen, I know with how the world is looking right now, it might feel good knowing where exactly you are safe. And let me just tell you from the bottom of my heart, if you are part of the LGBTQIA+ community or any other marginalized group, Black, Asian, Hispanic, anything like that, and you're not feeling safe in the world, you are not only welcome in my Discord, you are wanted. I want you, I'm begging you to come talk to us about literally anything. Pets, music, movies, food, whatever you want, please come over and just hang out. With that being said, next time I will be going full monkey mode as I check out Dun Jungle, an indie roguelike created by an indie developer I've been in contact with for a while now. This one is for you, Bruno. I'm so excited to play it! But anyway, I appreciate you for watching. So thanks for stopping by and have a great day.